Hey, how we doing? Good? All right. Last year, I was in Houston, and I was advising a church and working with a team. I was doing some consulting on church and LGBTQ-related issues. And they had given me a whole list of different problems and situations they wanted to talk through, questions that they had. And then at the end, they said, oh yeah, we've got one more, which you always know that's not necessarily a good thing. They're like, oh yeah, can we talk about one more thing? They said, sure, we'd love to. I said, sure, I'd love to. And so they said, here's what happened. About 2 weeks ago, there's this lesbian couple who were married. They came up to us, our staff. They had been attending our church for about 6 months or so, and they had gotten involved. They had been attending. They really didn't make their relationship a big deal in the church, and they didn't want to be known for that. But we just knew that they were going to come up and talk to us. So finally, they came up to one staff member, and they kind of cornered this staff member and said, hey, we have a question. And this staff member was just thinking to himself, oh, I'm the one. Oh, I have to talk to, it's going to be a tough conversation. And this married lesbian couple looks at the staff member and says, hey, we're married and we love each other, but we now believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. What should we do? Then these people in this room with me looked at me and said, what should we do? And I looked at them and I said, I think we should go to Buffalo Wild Wings. You always get good answers there. It's a great question, right? What should we do? That's probably a question that a lot of you are asking when it comes to issues and conversations and dialogue about human sexuality. What should we do? It's a question I get a lot. If you don't know who I am, my name is Caleb Kaltenbach, and I'm a unique person. I'm a very unique person. I've fully embraced that about myself. I met Kiefer Sutherland a couple years ago, and I didn't want to be the guy to go up to him and say, hey, dude, I loved you in 24. And so I went up to him and I said, hey, man, I just want to let you know you were good in The Lost Boys. And he looked at me, he's like, wow, thanks, man. Nobody said that to me in 10 years. I said, you're a unique person, aren't you? I said, you have no idea. I was raised by 3 LGBTQ parents, and they were activists, and eventually I came to faith. I became a pastor. Eventually, they came to faith. And now I spend my time trying to help churches and organizations and ministry foster community with LGBTQ individuals without sacrificing their conviction. And that question comes up a lot. What should we do? Howard Hendricks, very, very famous and well-known professor at Dallas Theological Seminary, is known for saying many great things. He's the one that originally said, experience doesn't make you better, evaluated experience makes you better. In his book, Living by the Book, which is one of the best books on hermeneutics there is, he said that if you want to understand a question, if you want to understand a passage, you've got to bombard it with questions. And I think that this is a situation where there really aren't a lot of prescripted principles that you and I can really throw out at people. But when we really don't know what to do, we need to ask questions. And so I have 6 questions for you today. 6 questions that I think that staff, team members, and leaders need to be asking themselves, and really more than that, discussing in regards to the LGBTQ conversation. And I know that I have 6, and that technically you're supposed to have 5 or 7, because 6 is man's number, but I don't care. I have 6. Live with it. Okay, here's the very first question. Why have LGBTQ individuals left our church? That's a question you need to be asking. And that's not just a question you need to be talking about around your conference room table or your meeting table or your elder team meeting. You need to actually go to LGBTQ individuals that you know and ask them, why did you leave our church? And I know some are automatically thinking, well, they left our church because they don't agree with us. No, not necessarily. You'd be surprised. Many people are willing to attend their church if they disagree with you. It's usually how they were made to feel by somebody. And you need to go and ask them this question and just listen and take notes and show them that you value who they are. Okay? Second question is this. How do our systems and processes help LGBTQ individuals engage our church? In other words, Are we making it easy for people who are lesbian or who are transgender, gay men, people who are bisexual or even asexual? Are we making it easy for them to engage our church, or are we making it difficult? Because here's what I really believe. That engagement happens when people get involved, when people experience belonging. And nobody will make the church their primary community outside of their family if they don't feel safe to come over and try it out. And so nobody's going to say, hey, this is no longer my primary community. The church is my primary community if they don't feel safe enough to check it out. And so do we have systems and processes in line that help them get involved, that allows them to serve up to a certain point? Have we set boundaries? Do we know how to have difficult conversations about serving? Can they easily get into small groups? Can they invite? Can they give? Well, that's a dumb question. Of course they can. It doesn't matter who you are. You can give, right? But can they engage? Can they do whatever it takes to get involved up to a certain level? And do we know what that level is? Right before Messy Grace came out, I got together with about 12 or 15 LGBTQ individuals that attended the church that I was at. Most of them were millennials. Some of them were in relationships. Some of them were in between. Some of them were confused. And I said, I want you to come over to my house every Tuesday night from 8 to 10. I'm not going to try to de-gay ya or anything like that. I just want to hear your stories. And I also just want to talk about Jesus. We didn't bring up sexuality, intimacy, relationships, or anything within that time. And I learned so much. So much. All of them had a bad church experience. They were hurting. One of them said, Caleb, I go to church every Sunday that I can, and I raise my hands and I worship God, but yet I feel like I really can't get involved in this church. And I asked him why, and he said, because I feel like God hates me. He said, do you know how hard it is to sing songs to somebody you think hates you? I got teary-eyed. I said, God does not hate you. He sent his son to die for you. God doesn't do that to people he hates. I said, I love you, and I wouldn't even do that for you. I'm serious. I wouldn't let my son die for him. He's going down. But God loves him so much that he allowed his son to die for him. And so on the very last evening, I said, I want to, you guys have helped me so much. We've been able to think about some of our systems and processes. We're changing some of those around. But I felt like I had earned enough credibility to be able to ask this question. I said, I want to ask this question, and I hope you don't take it the wrong way. And they knew me. They already knew by that point that I was a moron. And I said, here's my question. You know that our church is, quote unquote, as much as I hate this label, it is non-affirming. And yet some of you are in relationships. Why do you choose to attend our church and not a church that agrees with you, or that just really embraces that, is considered affirming? And they gave me many answers. Their words, not mine. One of them said, I don't want to go to a gay church. All they talk about is being gay, and I am gay, and it gets boring after a while. His words, not mine. Another individual said, those churches don't preach the gospel. A third individual, actually a couple, said, we don't need to agree with everything a church believes to attend there. We just need to know that we have a place to belong. Do your systems and processes in your church allow people to experience belonging, to get a taste of belonging, so that they can ultimately belong to the Father? Next question is this: how are we preserving space for students to disagree and dialogue about identity? This is where the front lines of the battle is, people. Your family ministries. How are we preserving space for students to disagree and dialogue about identity? Because it's not just any longer, it's not just sex issues with students. It's now identity. And let's just be honest. Ever since Genesis 3, when the serpent went up to Eve and said, hey, you'll be just like God if you eat this fruit, the conversation has been about identity ever since, and it's really highlighted right now. And are we preserving students to disagree with us and still feel like they're welcome? Are we creating space and safe environments within our student ministry for students to be able to dialogue, especially high school students, especially middle school students, to be able to ask questions without fear of getting in trouble, without fear of being yelled at, without fear of having Leviticus thrown in their face? Are we preserving this space? Because here's the deal. If you're not preserving this space, you will have no voice in this conversation. How can you better support your student ministry team, your family ministry team? The next question is just as important. How are we partnering with parents to help them empathize with their LGBTQ kids? How are we partnering with parents to help them not to be jerks? And I'm dead serious. When their kids come out to them, are we actually talking to parents about sexuality? Are we telling them not to freak out? It never fails. When I go speak at a church, there are always parents who come up to me and they're crying, and I see the pain, and they say, my child came out to me. What should I do? And here's my answer to them. I can't imagine how you feel, and I'm so sorry for how you feel. Here's my answer to you. Don't do very much. Here's what you can do. Pray for your child. Get to know them better. Not that you didn't before, but the fact that they came out to you, that's a chance for you to lean into the relationship. Ask them questions. Listen. I mean, here's the deal. The human brain is not, scientifically, it's not done developing until about the age of 25, or according to my wife, the age of 40. I cannot tell you how many times I've talked to students. One year they'll say, I'm gay. The next year they'll say, I'm not gay anymore. And I'm thinking, wow, it's like a Christmas miracle. And I say that just because there is a sense in which within youth culture, within high schools and middle schools, there is a trendiness. But at the same time, if you really are same-sex attracted, that doesn't go away usually. That stays. And that's important for us to understand. That's important for us, to empathize with, not only with our kids, but some of us in here, and I'm looking at you straight parents, some of us in here are jerks to other people's kids. By saying, well, I don't want that kid in the student ministry if there are other kids in there that are lesbian or gay, and I can't believe that they're letting, these other kids in there, these other students in there. Well, somehow they're letting your student in there. We can have a meeting about your student if you want, but that's fine. You need to help other parents understand that it's not their responsibility to shelter their kids. It's their responsibility to teach their kids how to be like Jesus. Which leads me to this next question. I think this is so important. It might be the most important question. How can we help celibate individuals carry a difficult burden? People in the church and church leaders throw out celibacy as a suggestion like it was Tylenol. Well, I'm same-sex attracted. Well, there's celibacy. Do you know how horrible that sounds to somebody that's same-sex attracted? I've heard people say, well, it's not the same thing as, it's the same thing as being single and heterosexual. No, it's not. Because if you're single and heterosexual, there's always a chance, unless you're committed to celibacy, that you will be able to find somebody. In this situation, no. You're not going to grow old with somebody unless you develop feelings for somebody of the opposite sex. If you are committed to following Jesus and honoring him with your celibacy, and that's what I mean by following Jesus within your celibacy, you're probably not going to find someone. So how do we help some people carry a difficult burden? There was a guy that I got to know at this church, and we've kept in contact. He was involved at a church up in the Northwest that blew up, and he was kind of the member that everybody would send people to. When an LGBTQ individual came to the church, they would send them to this individual. His name is Mark. Mark moved down to this church I was speaking at. He and I started texting. We've kept in contact, and he is celibate, but he said, my biggest fear is being alone for the rest of my life. And I was able to ask him questions about intimacy and how he experienced intimacy. And he said, I understand that sexual intimacy is not the highest intimacy there is. I understand that there will be no sex in heaven. I understand that there will be agape love in heaven and phileo love in heaven, but not eros love. He said, but I'm not really even looking for eros. I'm looking for that one-on-one personal relationship. He said, it is so difficult, but I cannot tell you how close I feel with God. And he said, God has never taken away the sting of what it feels like to be alone on some nights, but God always drives me to my knees so I can cry out to him. There are so many people saying, well, celibacy is not a realistic issue. Okay, maybe not, but neither is faith. How are we as a church becoming family for people that decide to honor Jesus with a difficult burden? If you don't, listen to me, church leaders, hear me out on this, without committing heresy. Am I committing heresy? Let's find out, Gene. How about that? Do me a favor. Don't tell somebody to be celibate unless you have a plan to walk with them the rest of their life. Unless your church team is ready to become family to them. I don't think you have the credibility or the moral authority or the right to even suggest celibacy until you take that journey with them. And if you don't know what to do, and you still are just like, oh, we're just stuck and I'm not sure what to do, here's the sixth question that I think is important. I want you to ask yourself this. What are we willing to do to keep and build influence with, you fill in the blank? What are we willing to do to keep and build influence with Jim, with Marty, with Sheila? What are we willing to do to keep and build influence? When parents ask me, should I attend my son or daughter's gay wedding? I ask them this question. What are you willing to do to keep and build influence with your child? Does that mean that you should be willing to do anything? Not necessarily. You should still have boundaries. I would never officiate a same-sex wedding, but I personally would attend one because I want that influence. This church in Houston, with that couple that I told you about in the beginning of the story of my talk here, they actually came alongside this African-American couple. This African-American couple, this lesbian couple, were afraid of getting divorced. One of them had schizophrenia. She was afraid of not having her medicine, and she got health insurance through her marriage. And this church came around them and helped them create a plan so that they could have this insurance, so that they could be supported, so that they could follow God in their holiness. Are you willing to have the difficult conversations on a regular basis to help people follow Jesus well and identify him regardless of their sexual orientation? What are you willing to do to keep and build influence in the life of somebody that Jesus Christ died and rose for?